Hi, everybody. Barry McGuire here for Barry McGuire's Creative Real Estate Education Series. It's Monday, October 3rd, 2022. Uh, we are just back from finishing our second live event since COVID. We did the all-day AFS event, Agreement for Sale event up here in Edmonton on Saturday, September 24th, and it was a knockout. We're going to talk more about that a bit later. Any few folks who tune in know we talk about all things creative real estate. We have lots of experts and pros on, and sometimes I talk a bit more about that than I'm going to do now. But right now, we are going to have one of our focus team leaders on, Dean Mantai, who's going to, hey, Dean.
Hey.
There he is. So Dean took our AFS course in 2019. And he got a deal going in the first couple of months, and he's now done 8 AFS deals. So like we said, they're not on every street corner, but that's a couple of year plus. Well, I guess it's actually 2 a year. No, a little more than 2 a year since Dean started. And so I've had it in my mind that I wanted to do a segment called One Man, 8 Deals. Dean has 20 minutes before he has to head off to another engagement. So Dean, let's talk about your 8 deals. Let's start with the first one.
Okay, so the very first one I got was a young lady that had bought a townhouse out in Airdrie. She had run into some financial trouble, and so we had a couple of meetings, but I brought up the AFS option with her, and she very much liked the option. It solved her problem for her, and I, at the time, didn't realize how important it is to have a certain amount of control of where your seller goes to get their legal advice, because AFSs just aren't talked about in legal circles, or really at all. So anyway, she ended up going to get independent counsel, and I said, yeah, go wherever you want. It doesn't matter. And took it to this older lawyer, and he basically said, I'm not letting you sign this today. You have to go home and sleep on it, young lady. Like, quite literally, those are the words that he told her. And then she came back the next day. She said, okay, it's still the best solution for me. I'm ready to sign. And he essentially just berated this poor girl until she was in tears and said, I don't know what to do, but I can't go with you. And I said, well, what are you going to do? And to this day, I don't know, unfortunately, what happened to that girl. It would have been a great solution, but again, you do what you can, and
you can. Well, we talked about it a lot at the AFS event on September 24th. It's just so important to have a lawyer on the other side who understands AFS and who also, importantly, doesn't object to the concept. Mm-hmm. So yeah, now we have a list of lawyers, and we can recommend other lawyers. They're going to give their good legal advice. If they don't think there's something that needs to be done, they'll do that, but they won't do what that lawyer did. Well, that was deal number 1. Let's look at deal number 2.
Okay, so deal number 2 was a property in Evanston. So it was technically my first completed deal, AFS deal. And it was a lady that, again, she was gainfully employed. She actually had a really good job with the government. So I don't dig too deeply, but she had gotten into a little bit of trouble, and she refinanced this townhouse that she had in Evanston. And essentially the refinance was at like a 15% interest rate on, I want to say the loan was originally 20 grand. And so she became an accidental landlord. She moved in with a friend, and then rented the place out. Rent didn't even begin to cover, both mortgages. And so things just kept kind of spiraling.
Yeah. Downward.
Right? Downward, down the toilet, unfortunately. So, and so we had a couple of talks, and, I basically said, well, based on what this is, I can take over both mortgages, but it wouldn't leave you with anything. And so that was that was the negotiation. We talked 2 or 3 times, and so our negotiation ended up that I would give her, I think I gave her $3,000. And literally she needed the cash so bad we drove to the bank like that night. Like I have a video, testimonial video of her in my car in the parking lot. But in the end we ended up, so I paid out that second mortgage because it just didn't make sense. And so I think there was something like 18 left on it when I paid that out. And then this is one where it's super important, as we talked about in the course, to protect yourself when somebody already is in a little bit of trouble. So in this case, I'd learned from Neil that I always put a second mortgage on there that protects my interest, because I bought it with some equity in it. And then of course there was some mortgage pay down. And so about 2 years in, I got a call from a bankruptcy trustee looking for some equity out of that place. In which case you and I had discussed it, and we just basically said, you know, there's nothing here. My mortgage more than eats up anything, and I never heard from them again. But again, that could have been a little bit of a legal battle, quite honestly, if I hadn't put that second mortgage on and known what to do there. So so that one, just to take it through to completion, is one I sold this year. And after mortgage pay down and expenses, not including my monthly cash flow, I made $82,000.
My goodness.
So that was my first completed deal. And then the rest of them I've used as flips, as a mechanism, so that I don't have to raise $300,000, $400,000, $500,000 at a time. I talked about the kind of my most memorable one on the weekend there. In that this couple had pretty much, it was an estate home really in Bonavista, and this poor guy, he had gotten a rare disease, taken some time off work, and then that's right around the time that the economy tanked for oil and gas, and he was in oil and gas, so he couldn't get his job back, and so he played in the stock market a little bit. He was trying to do what he could, but he had some physical challenges, let's say. And so it got to a point that his wife was also working, but just couldn't cover enough, I guess you could say. And so he got to a point where this illness, one of the side effects is that it would start to rot your teeth from the inside out. Oh. And so he needed like a massive dental procedure. I think it was to the tune of like $25,000 or $30,000 or something. Like, it was huge. So he took out a second mortgage through Alpine Credit, and it was basically the straw that broke the camel's back. He it was 16% interest or something like that. And so sad, he didn't even get a chance to use that money for the dental procedure because things had gone so far. And so like he called some of my marketing, and we had a chat on the phone, and I got to realize like there's some good numbers here. So I ran over there same day, and we had a good chat. Like, we talked for over an hour, kind of told me the story, and, you know, feel for the guy, right? I said, well, you know, it's an executive home, so it won't cash flow. The only way that I could possibly do this is, you know, as a flip. And you have to realize that if I'm doing it as a flip, I have to have margins in there that, you know, satisfy me, satisfy my investors, etc. And what could help me with that is doing seller financing, which of course I was talking about an agreement for sale. And I mean, honestly, he wouldn't care what the name of it was. You know, these guys just wanted help, right? And so, yeah, so I gave them some moving money. They agreed to carry both of those mortgages. And because it was a flip, I didn't even bother paying out the second. I kept paying the interest rate, knowing that I had worked it into my numbers for my flip. And so we didn't do too much on that. We refinished the floors, we painted the whole place, just did a real nice cleanup. I wish I would have staged it, to be honest. That's actually one of my one of my things going back. I'm like, dang, I think I could have done better, but that's okay. And so 3 months to the day when I got it, it went firm sale. And so I got a video, I stuck it up. Like my realtor is a buddy of mine. I'm now a realtor, but I stuck up the sold thing, and within a couple of days, that seller reached out to me, and he's like, "Hey, I saw the house sold." I said, "Yeah," like not knowing what's happening next, right? Because some people, could be a little twisty about the fact that you turned it in 3 months, right?
Yeah.
And so his next message was, "You know what? Thank you so much. You have no idea what you did for us." Yeah. And it's good.
That's good. So for folks who are listening, Bonavista in Calgary is a very nice district. It's a high-end district, right?
Very.
So,
yeah.
So that
one of the few lake communities.
Right. It's Lake Bonavista. That's right.
Yeah.
So that would be a very nice house in a very nice area. And so for folks who are listening, Dean, did you do reasonably well out of that one, Dean? I mean, you don't have to tell us what you made if you're not comfy doing that, but you can if you want.
So that was a few years back. I want to say I'm guesstimating that I'm probably pretty close if I said 55.
That's not bad on the 3 month turnaround. That's really good.
Yeah,
that's really good. And the interesting thing is, and we've seen it time and again, and you have seen it time and again, is people are in trouble. They need to get help somewhere from someone, and there's nobody to help. There's nobody to come along. He didn't have either family. He couldn't borrow money other than Alpine Credit, which is a high sweat second lender. Mm-hmm. He had his rare life-threatening disease. His teeth were going all wonky on him. And I mean, this is a big pile of trouble that he's in. And what else was he going to do? Somebody's got to come along. And so his pain point that he really, I mean, he had no ability to earn income. His wife wasn't earning enough to pay the freight. And so his house is now a millstone around his neck, and with that extra high interest rate. Is that his situation?
Yeah. And it was to the point where he needed to be out like in 2 weeks. Otherwise there was going to be stuff that was going to be bouncing out of his account. Like he needed this, he needed that burden gone. Yeah. And it couldn't be, soon enough.
Yeah, so he didn't have a traditional exit. He couldn't go to see you if you were a realtor and say, "Dean, I need to sell quickly." And you say, I hear you say you need it done in 2 weeks. That's like impossible. Can't be done in 2 weeks. So, yeah, so folks who are listening, an agreement for sale is about solving other people's problems. And it's many times they just cannot do anything in any traditional way. So if you understand an agreement for sale and can come along and offer them a solution that works for them and solves their problems, it's not a third party objectively sensible thing to do. It's what the seller needs to help him get rid of stress and problems. And that's where the AFS strategy is so successful. So that's 3. The first one didn't work out. Then there was the Airdrie property. Then there was this one. Let's go. We've got 7 minutes to talk about the next deals.
Okay. So Braeside, I guess next one that comes to mind would be Braeside. So this is a girl that purchased a townhouse with her then boyfriend. Didn't work out. And she decided, forget it. I'm out of Calgary. At the time, Calgary wasn't doing really well, obviously, with COVID and everything else. And so she just, she was a content creator. So she could do what she did anywhere on earth. So she left the country and she started traveling. And she had sold everything in Calgary except for this townhouse at the time. And she was renting it remotely and having friends kind of, try and run a rental, which I can't even imagine. And so she called me off my website and basically kind of told me her story. And she's like, I'm never coming back to Calgary. This is the last asset that I own in Canada. Can you help me? And so she had a really good interest rate. It was like below 2%. And I was like, great. Explain the AFS to her. She's like, honestly, it's been empty for 3 months. I don't care. Like, she didn't care about her credit because she's not coming back here. Like, she's like, I'll sign whatever you need me to sign. I'm like, okay, great. And so this was like a truly nothing deal. Hey, Neil. And so I think I paid her legal fees. I don't even know if I did that. I can't even recall on that one. But so we got full control of the property. And we basically started renovating because it was kind of a bit of an oddball. It had previously been renovated when she bought it, and it was just not up to what the current standards are. So we did a nice little renovation in there, and she carried the whole thing. So all I had to do was pay for my construction costs, and we ended up selling that one, and we like hit it out of the park. We were the highest sale in that complex by $40,000.
Yes.
After we were all said and done with that one. So that was kind of neat, and then of course I kept her in the loop as things were closing, sent her pictures of the final product. So yeah, I mean, she was super pleased. And so I said, hey, good news. The last piece of your Canada assets is now gone. It's like, hey, thanks so much. You made this so easy. And she gave us a really nice testimonial, like a video testimonial. So yeah, I mean, I appreciate it when people are just like, yeah, we're good. Let's go ahead. Makes it nice and easy.
It does make it easy. Before we carry on, I'll just formally say hi to Neil. Hi, Neil.
Hello, everyone. Hi, Barry.
Hey, thanks for showing up. That's good. So, folks, again, here was a seller with a problem. Seller, vacant place, renting's not working out. She's traveling, never coming back to Canada. This whole thing, it's like it's a big weight on somebody's shoulders. It's like they're carrying one of those giant iron safes strapped to their back, and they're hauling it around, and they don't see any way out, and they just can't do it. And it's like, what are you going to do when you're traveling who knows where and never coming back? So what this seller wanted and what Dean was able to supply is a way out of what her problem was. It wasn't a situation where he's going to make everything all better for her. It's a situation where if your issue is you can't carry this house anymore and you don't want it and it's a burden, well, here's what I can do. You've got probably other things you can do, but that's kind of up to you. Here's what I can do for you. And so you're Dean, you were $40,000 higher than the other highest sale in that particular complex. Sounds like you made decent money on this one. So we've got an 82,000, we've got a 55,000. What did we do on this one? 68,000. Are you people listening to this? Are you listening? And I hope people are seeing this. She was overjoyed for you, was she not? She was so happy that what your plan was worked out for you. She didn't care that you made $68,000. What she cared about was getting rid of her problem, which you did very nicely, and which she liked so much, she gave you a great testimonial.
Correct.
Isn't that it?
That's win-win. That's the essence of it.
That is the essence of the whole thing. And again, anybody who's listening who hasn't been to one of the courses, we are so big on the win-win side of it, not beating people up, try and offer them a different solution if one appears to us that doesn't appear to them. But folks are entitled to make their own deal. That's what contract law says. There's judges from one end of the country to the other who say people who contract with each other can cut any kind of deal they want as long as somebody isn't being unduly influenced or misrepresentation going on. somebody can make a deal that looks bad to you as a third-party observer, but seems great to them. So,
Mhm.
and Dean, it's 5:20.
I have to go.
Tag!
Thanks for showing up.
Tag, Neil, you're it.
One man, 8 deals will continue at a future date.
Sounds good. Take care. Thanks for
Did you
having
have
me.
to buy a house, Dean?
I'll tell you later.
Bye.
Bye.
The old expression, Barry, was, oh, we lost Barry. The old expression was got to go see a man about a horse, but I think it's now got to go see someone about a house. So
That is,
we'll take horse out and we'll put in house these days.
yeah, it's Dean was talking about one of his deals, and he got a call. It's before you came on, and he said, guy contacted him on the website, sounded like it might be good, and I don't know if he said he got on his horse and went over there right away, but got to go see someone about a house, folks. When the opportunities pop up, you get on your horse and get over and see whoever it is about that house.
Car and run. Well,
Get going.
And floor it.
Get over there. When people are in trouble, of course, they don't know who you are. They might see that you've got a website. They might somehow have been referred to you, but you are not the only one that they're reaching out to. So that's
both Dean and I have lost deals because we weren't able to get there in a timely fashion, or as timely as the seller wanted, and they're dialing for dollars, as the expression goes, and just going through their Google search going, who's next?
Yeah.
And if someone doesn't answer the phone, there was a lot of training about having live answering services versus leaving a message, and someone can get a message to you right away. So for sure, there's some advantages in that.
Yeah, it's you have to move quickly or you will lose deals, and there's nothing like losing a deal to make you move quickly on the next one.
Live and learn, for sure.
So Neil, we had a great time last Saturday on September 24th.
Truly so.
It was an excellent event up here in Edmonton. The room at the top of the Delta South, top of the inn, they call it. It's a beautiful room looking north and south, floor to ceiling windows. I love that room. I would do every event in that room if we could. It just feels so good. It was. What did you think of the event? I've got my own view of it. Give us the busman summary of how it seemed to you.
Here's a good summary. Maybe I've had a couple people I chatted to about it post that weekend, and I think one of the things I said was that the group that was there 2 weekends ago was so engaged, more so than perhaps even some of the others. And I mean, we always have a level of engagement.
Yeah.
But the engagement that existed there, and to see the questions that were asked, that there are no bad questions. These questions, on top of not being bad questions, were thoughtful and provocative and engaged some conversation. So for sure, it was one of those ones where you walked away going, that felt good. So absolutely.
Yeah. I think that was our takeaway, Donna and my takeaway, that we've never had a bad event.
Right.
But this one was a bit different for its level of engagement, its level of analysis from people. As always, when we were finished the formal portion there about 4:45 on Saturday afternoon, folks can leave if they want. We had 43 people in the room. I think one person had to leave. 42 people stayed until 6:30. So we stopped at 4:45, and at 6:30 we were kind of winding down, but there were lots and lots and lots of really good questions that I think gave our panel, Neil was on the panel, Dean was on the panel, it gave us we have to give our heads a bit of a scratch to come up with answers that fit. So I think that's kind of my observation, is the level of it all. Donna, what did you think? Donna's my producer, and she's sitting right next to me here, so I can look over it.
Yeah, I thought it was good.
Donna thought it was good.
Donna wants the table on the south side of the room if you're going to use that same room next time.
Oh,
Yes.
Since in the sun.
yes.
in the sun. Yeah, it was the air conditioning was certainly working in there.
Do you guys want to get into some questions?
Yes, we're going to have a chat a bit farther on, Neil, about the question of filing a second mortgage when you buy by way of agreement for sale. That's one of the questions in here, but let's look at questions. Donna, pop something up. All right. This is Sahil, isn't it?
Yeah.
Okay, I have one question. I'm looking at an 11-unit multifamily AFS deal where the seller won't accept an AFS offer without a deposit, almost equivalent to his equity portion of about 5%. I'm okay with the deposit, but the building needs some renos as well as about close to 5% of the price. So when renos are 5%, deposits 5%. Do you advise I register a second mortgage for my renovation capital along with an AFS title caveat?
So it might be a two answers in one type thing. We can cover the second mortgage general question, then put it in terms of what Sahil's talking about here. Do you want to go first, Barry? Or you want me to go first?
Let's do that. I'll let you start. And so for
little backstory for those of you who weren't at the course, we did an agreement for sale, I'll say 8 to 10 years ago, with a fellow who couldn't sell, house needed renos. It was one of those, fairly cookie cutter type deals where the man was stuck because he couldn't list it, didn't want to list it, didn't have the money to renovate it. Short version is the house was very close. I think we may have bought it for mortgage value. We might have given him a very small sum of money, but it was a high loan to value or low equity, no equity deal, as you call it in your course guides. So in the no equity deal, back in those days, we didn't put a second mortgage on it. And where we ran into a problem was the seller, unbeknownst to us, went and declared bankruptcy and declared the house that he had sold to us as an asset and the underlying debt from the first mortgage below it. And so the bankruptcy trustee, of course, sent us a thing because we had been fortunate enough to file a purchaser's interest caveat on title. So we got notification of the action at least. We've since changed our wording. I'm pretty sure your contracts all talk about the beneficial interest ownership being in there to really try and differentiate it if we ever had to go to bankruptcy court again. But we hired a bankruptcy lawyer and we were able to show the trustee in this case that really there was no equity in that property. So they weren't going to be getting anything from it. And I'll sidetrack on my sidetrack because that's something new for me. We had another one years ago where there was literally no equity, and we reached out to the trustee in a bankruptcy situation, reached out. The trustee wouldn't even take the time to answer us because they knew that they were just wasting, oxygen or typing time or however you want to put it, email bites to us because they were not going to get a dime recovered from us out of that asset for their creditors. So come back to this house with this other fellow. What we ended up doing is the trustee said, yeah, that kind of makes sense. What can you do for me? And we're like, oh, good. So we threw him a bone. I can't remember if it was like $2,500 just to go away, to get a release letter so that they could go to their creditors to say, listen, we've looked at this asset called house. We've looked at mortgage. We agree that by the time, if we were to take this through, that there really wouldn't be much of anything, but we were able to get $2,500 for it right now. We paid our lawyer bill and we went on our way with that one. And that situation is what led us to start putting and filing second mortgage on every agreement for sale, regardless of high equity, low equity. I'll come back to your 11-unit multifamily question. We would absolutely do everything we could to shove that property actually underwater. So not just the 5% that you're putting down, not the 5% of equity, and not the 5%, of 15% total there of the price. We would register a second mortgage so that in the case of if the seller is to declare a bankruptcy, that there is truly demonstrably no equity left in that property.
All right. So, folks, if you've taken an AFS course, some of this will be familiar to you. If you haven't, you got to mark down in your calendar. If you're a fan of this series that we do, we do our focus workshops probably 2 a year. We only do 2 a year. It's not like they're around every weekend. And so the AFS strategy and some of the other creative strategies have a level of complication that's difficult for you to just, read a book and then dive in and get going. Education is ultra important. And so if you've taken one of the AFS courses, what Neil has been just speaking about would make some sense to you. If you have never taken a course, then you're going, I don't know what these guys are talking about. And so when you're doing any kind of creative strategy, you really have to have your ducks in a row. You've got to have appropriate documentation. You have to understand the whys and hows of what you're doing and make sure things get done. Because if you don't, you wouldn't be able to fend off a bankruptcy trustee like Neil could. So he talked about filing a purchaser's interest caveat, and Sahil is speaking about that as well. So the caveat is how we register notice on the title, because remember with AFS, title is staying in the seller's name, but you as a buyer have a beneficial interest. The caveat is how we register the purchaser's interest here in Alberta. Every province has their own way of registering your beneficial interest in an AFS. I think we're the only ones that do it by way of caveat, but every province has some form of notice setup that you can do. So that's just a bit for folks who haven't done the AFS course yet, but they will sooner or later.
I'll jump in when we're talking about AFS course, Barry. There was someone, and I apologize if you're watching this, I can't remember. I met a lot of people that weekend, but that particular individual had purchased the online course from you and then supplemented it with the live training. And what they said to me was that by having the ability to have that content ahead of time and then go to the course, the second time through anything, there's a little bit more familiarity that happens instead of everyone going like, what? And the first time through, or maybe having watched a few of these or been in the creative group and read some of the stuff, the more that you have a level of knowledge coming into that course, so that there's an opportunity for someone to not have to wait and certainly get started in this environment and ask questions as they need to, a view of the rest of the focus team for sure. So that was a plug, by the way.
Well, I mean, thanks for doing that. But as you're saying it, Don and I are, not the world's best marketers, but as you say it, and just thinking generally, it takes a long time to learn anything. Any new thing takes a long time to learn. It's impossible for most people, for most situations, to go through something once and go, oh yeah, I get it. I'm perfect. I'm an expert now. So yeah, for something that's got as much detail as the agreement for sale, AFS strategy, or any of the other strategies, to buy that online course and spend some time and go through it and read it and listen, look at the audio, look at the video if there is, listen to the audio, do the exercises, read the manual, and then come to the live event. Man, I think, Donald, mark that down. We have to start talking about that as I think a really good thing for people to do. The cost is minimal. What did Dean say? His first 3 deals, he made $82,000, $55,000. I don't have the timing on the 3, but only for the second one. That was a $55,000 profit in start to finish, 3 months. 3 months.
We've said that for years. You take one good course in any of your series, Barry, and do that first damn deal. What's the ROI on that? The return is,
my goodness,
far better than you're going to get darn near anywhere else, right? Because of
yes, and if Dean had have done that, if he had have taken the online course and then come to the course, I mean, he would have spent probably $2,500 or $3,000, and he made $82,000 on his first one, $55,000 on his second one, $62,000 on his third one, and he has 5 more to tell us about. One man, 8 deals. So,
and to think that he was a little hesitant about coming, we drove up from Calgary to Red Deer. I don't know if you shared that or not, because Dean and I knew each other prior to this course, and I came as part of Focus Team. He came as a participant. I think, he was a last minute sign up. So,
He was, and you know, he Dean's a guy who has really progressed along the way. He was kind of a grumpy, non-believing. Donna says he wasn't grumpy.
He's just a little driven.
He's a little driven. He was like this in the front row.
35 minutes into the video, I have to tell Dean, you need to play the replay at 30. Go to 34:46 and start replaying the
Read that. Read that. Now, I looking at Don's comment, and then I want to go back to Sahil's question. I've been in the live course twice, read the manual from the first time, did a couple of AFS in 2019. I still show up to most of these lives, and I'm still learning. Don, that is so true. It's so true. There's something to be learned every time. And I'm learning things about AFS all the time as well. We're always improving documents. We're always getting more circumstances and coaching from our students who say, hey, guess what I did? And we go, really? You did that? Wow. So back to
Sahil. If you had the manual from the very first Rapid Cash, Barry McGuire, Donna McGuire course, and looked at it to today, the documents, the case studies, the everything in there, they've evolved, they've morphed, they've updated. We never talked about things like second mortgage back in the day. We didn't talk about, unfortunately, and it's on my list of things to do, there was something that you said, Barry, right at the end of the course. I went, whoa, got to write that down. Some new wording, new clause, and I didn't write it down at the time of course, and I should have.
Wait for the recording.
Donna says, wait for the recording. But yes, we've modified the buyer's version of the agreement for sale document that everybody's getting.
Okay.
To allow for that circumstance where it's time for the buyer to exit the AFS and they want to get on their own mortgage. They're not fix and flipping. They're not selling to somebody else. They want to get their own mortgage and perhaps keep the property. And because title's in the seller's name, some lenders get a little iffy about that. I mean, some lenders are cooperative, some aren't. I think you deal with Service Credit Union, and Andrea does, and they're reasonably cooperative. But and that's maybe a local branch thing, who knows? But lenders just don't quite understand a situation where you're coming to them to get a mortgage, but they pull out a title and they say, but you're not on the title. How do you think you can mortgage a property you don't own? And then you're into the AFS explanation. So this clause says that the seller will allow you to transfer the property to yourself.
Oh, okay.
So you get to transfer the property to yourself. You have to be able to show the seller that you've got a mortgage lined up. And if you could just get the title in your name, then you could put the mortgage on, you could pay him. So that avoids having to go to Calvert and borrow their money to pay out the seller. It's a less expensive way to do it and leaves kind of the buyer in control. So that's what we were talking about. And of course, you'll get the most recent version of that so you can adapt the clause for your own agreement.
Perfect.
Now, for Sahil, what size of second mortgage? Let's say he's buying his apartment for $1 million. I don't know what the price is. His 11 suiter is probably not getting it for $1 million, but let's just say it's $1 million. So he said he's got 5% deposit. That's what the seller's equity is. 5% are going to be renos. I don't know if there's another 5%, but if that was your deal, what size of second mortgage would you be putting on there?
Wow, that's a great question. Yeah, you're right. I misread it that it's not 15%. There's the 5% that's equivalent. So the current debt is about 95% of the value of the property as it sits. So if we're using your $1 million example, and 5 and 5 is 10% is $100,000. My clarifying question is going to be, once the property is renovated, multifamilies, and we're not going to make this into a multifamily course because I know just enough to be dangerous about it. I need Chris, who's our JV partner in that, on our multi. But multis are more, the values are more based on cap rates. And so we'd want to know if the property gets renovated, I'm guessing that the rents are going to increase, and therefore when you increase net operating income on an apartment building, that value climbs dramatically in comparison. So I would want to have a projection for increase in net operating income, which leads to an increase in property value. And I would want to probably be over that amount, that property amount by that final amount. 10% to allow for market growth again, because at some point in time, you also have to remember, and maybe 10% as I'm sitting here thinking about it isn't enough, because if you're at 95% of value today, and that's where it stands, you're also going to get mortgage pay down. So your second mortgage in behind that is going to keep coming down. So it might even be as high as 20% of the future projected cap rate value, if that makes sense. So if he lifts it from $1 million to $1.5 million, which is a huge lift, let's say if it's even $1.5 million, you'd want to be at 1.8 in total debt on that thing, because the debt's going to keep sinking every year, total debt on that property, by virtue of first mortgage pay down. Mm-hmm. If it's 1.3, then maybe at same thing, 250,000 on top of what you project the final value to be.
Yeah.
It also depends on how long the FS is going to go. And it certainly is very dependent on being able to explain that to a seller, that how you're doing that and why you're doing that.
Yes, and so if this is a building that's, the seller has 5% equity in it, and we don't know these facts from Sahil, but if he just bought it recently with CMHC financing, have the values dropped? Is the seller in trouble?
Lots
for
of
all
factors.
Of those reasons.
Yeah,
you got to be careful. All right, well then on to the technical side of things. Facebook user, are you saying that as a buyer, you can put a mortgage on the property to establish your interest in the property in a more concrete way? So that's exactly what we're saying. So when you're an AFS buyer, you acquire a beneficial interest in the property. Titles are divided into the legal interest and the beneficial interest. If you own a home, you own the legal interest and the beneficial interest. When you buy by way of agreement for sale, you acquire the beneficial interest from the seller. He retains the legal interest and the title in his name. So the caveat is typically used to just indicate that you have a beneficial interest. But as Facebook user says, and as Sahil is interested in establishing, we're now looking to establish a current and potential monetary interest in that property. That's calculated by looking at what you think the property is going to be worth by virtue of the renovations that you're doing. What about appreciation? What about mortgage pay down? And what about a little bit extra to cover yourself in case you've been a little light on how all those numbers will flow. So that's the why we do it. Now, Neil, here's a question for you. Somebody was asking me this. Just
before you flip to the next one, Barry, to answer this question though, does it actually establish more interest? In my head, it certainly goes really well to protect your interest and, more importantly, your future equity in the property, or any equity that isn't there today, or that if there is, that you may build into the property, right? If you had a property that was 50% loan to value, you still want to shove that thing way underwater.
I mean, yes, it's protecting your interest. Some of it definable and calculable at the moment, and some of it projected. So you're protecting your various potential interests in the property by the not only the caveat, but by the second mortgage. So a second mortgage isn't mentioned in any of the documentation that we use. How about for you, Neil? That for your own financing schedule or contract that you use, do you say in there, listen, I get to register a second mortgage and it can be for this amount? How do you work that into the the actual deal.
I don't have a Sched A in front of me right now, but I'm pretty sure we do, because otherwise, when it gets to the lawyers, the seller's lawyer, if it's not in there, is probably going to be questioning, going, "What's this all about?"
Yeah.
So I can pull one up if you want, but I'm pretty sure if it isn't, what I can do is I'm going to write myself a note and I'll get that clause, and I can post it to the group if you want, or send it to you.
Why don't you send it to me, send it to Donna.
Okay.
She and I will look at it, and then we'll get something up for the group that will be based on what you send,
Okay, sounds good.
and put together a suggestion and look at adding it to our standard documentation. Just kind of let everybody who likes that idea kind of do it on their own. It's been just sort of a bit much for people who are just getting started, but more and more, I think it's a good idea that it might be a more standard part of what we do. All right. Now there were some other comments at the event about whether you could use an agreement for sale other than for the residential side of things, which is the basis on which we teach the course. And what we said is that actually the AFS model is quite familiar to people in the multifamily area. Sahil is doing one. Donna, is Sahil in Saskatchewan, or is he here in Alberta?
Want to invest in Calgary?
Invest in Calgary?
I think his first one was in Regina, was it not?
His
Yeah.
first one was in Regina.
And it was an AFS.
And it was also an AFS.
Yeah.
So
First one that we know about.
yes, he might have done more. Sahil's a rocket. He's going like crazy. So folks, you can purchase multifamily properties by way of agreement for sale. Sahil has done it. He's got one done at least, and he's working on another one. You can purchase commercial properties by way of AFS. If you want to buy a strip mall, you can introduce that into the conversation. And you can buy agricultural land through AFS, and that might be the place that it's best known. Residential, multifamily, commercial, and
mini storage,
agricultural.
mobile park, you name it.
Anything.
Yeah.
Anything where there's land and debt, you can purchase by way of agreement for sale. In fact, I've had an inquiry this week where a guy who owns a building with a big shop in it is ready to retire. His building is paid off. And there's a young guy down the street who started the same kind of shop, but he's just started out, and he doesn't have the ability to qualify for a mortgage. But the seller knows him because they're kind of in the same business and on the same block. And so they are negotiating an agreement for sale. This is a $2 million deal, and the young guy down the block has $300,000 to put up on the $2 million deal. So 15% deposit, which is fairly decent, and it's going to be a reasonable interest rate. It's going to be a 2.5 year term. Young guy says that's lots of time for me to get my ducks in a row. My banker says if I do this, this, and this, I'll be ready in a year. But they've negotiated 2.5 years just to give them some breathing room. So that'll be a commercial building that will sell by way of agreement for sale, and everybody's going to be happy. Seller's going to get 5% on his money, which will be wonderful for him. He's going to get a little bit of income, and the young chappie down the block in the same business can't qualify for a mortgage, but it's a chance for him to buy a property at a great price. So these examples show up in my practice all the time. And so don't limit yourself to just thinking it's on the residential side, but there's lots on the residential side. It's more common because there's more residences than there are commercial buildings. All right. Questions. What would you want to be aware of for an AFS in BC? Is it very different from one in Alberta? So the agreement for sale concept is known in BC. Out there, the land titles office doesn't call it an agreement for sale. They call it a right to purchase, which kind of makes sense because an AFS document or an AFS deal is one where you're buying, but you're not getting title to the property till somewhere down the road. So I think the Land Titles Office in BC is considering the purchase part of right to purchase. You've actually closed the deal and get title in your name. So they do have those kinds of clauses and sections in the British Columbia Land Titles Act. It runs a little different out in BC. I think if you buy by way of agreement for sale, they consider it, even though it's the right to purchase, they charge you their land transfer tax, I think, in lots of different cases.
That was going to be my first question, right? How does land transfer tax play into that?
I believe they do. I believe they do charge it, but if anybody wants a referral to a BC lawyer, you can ask Donna, and we'll get you that. We'll get you that referral. So, it does operate a little bit differently in BC. I don't understand, and I'm not aware of all of the nuances because it's a provincial thing. I know that it's there. I know lawyers who do it. I know the Land Titles Office knows about it. I don't think it's hugely different because it can't be. I mean, it's a seller financing concept where the seller is going to be your bank, title is going to stay in his name. You're going to make payments to him. You're going to take over all of the responsibility for all of the costs of the property, and down the road, you have to pay the seller, and your exits are numerous. So
certainly the concept doesn't change.
Concept doesn't change. No,
yeah.
The
Buyer,
technicalities, technicalities might be a little bit different, but it's alive and well in BC too, and there might be more opportunities there as the market goes a little bit softer. What do you think of that, Neil?
It's something we touched on 2 weekends ago, that if you're in those markets and you run into a seller whose circumstances have changed and they had purchased in that last 4 to 8 months as things were peaking, and maybe even longer, depending on how the values, again, to say the average real estate value has changed, you really have to slice and dice down into your actual market. But you could be even back a year, quite frankly, and still be underwater if the property values are still even slightly above if they're above what folks paid for it a year. But say they're only up by about 5% and they put 5% down. We talk about this lots that. So as an example, if someone paid $500,000 for a property a year ago in BC or Ontario, and it went up by $100,000 and then back down by $80,000, and it's at 520, 515. By the time you wash out commissions to realtors and payout penalties, if they put 5% down on a $500,000 purchase, there's a very good chance that they are not only a low, but likely a no, and even a negative equity situation where they owe more than that property is worth, even though they could conceivably sell it for a gain in that 500 to 515, 520 scenario. So the opportunity is not just dictated by how's the economy doing, because even in a good economy, you'll find people with situations where they need to move, they've run out of money, they have a job change, they've had a life situation change, like a divorce, or the other way where their family's growing. So there will always be opportunities. The difference is now for you BC and Ontario folks is that a year ago, someone who had been in a property a year, that rising tide had floated that boat to the point where they could sell that property. If it was only worth 500 in our example a year ago, they might have only paid 450 for it the year before. And so there's a very good chance that they were able to get out of said property by way of conventional MLS type sales. So if you start to see a bunch of properties coming on to the rental side, for those of you who are landlords and are watching your market locally, you start going, there's more properties available, and that one doesn't look like a rental property. You start seeing properties that as an investor you wouldn't buy as a straight rental. That might be a hint that that's a trapped seller because of that situation.
Yes, this is the time to really be keeping an eye on your market. Remember, real estate is local. Don't be listening to people who say average prices across Canada are up or
Canada,
down,
yeah.
or that's a useless comment. It's a useless
Yeah.
comment.
It really is.
I mean, things are local. So, Neil, Airdrie, Alberta. You live in Airdrie, just a bit north of Calgary. How
Yep.
many people in Airdrie?
Last census count might have pushed us through 80,000. And as an
80,000.
aside, we moved here 22 years ago. It was 18, 19,000. Crazy.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. All right. So that's actually a decent sized community.
Right.
And so I'm just going to say to you that because it's, kind of a purpose built bedroom community, it's a homogenous community where, although there might be many neighborhoods, it's pretty much the same. And so you don't really need to know your neighborhoods in Airdrie because the
A
nature
house is a house is a house.
A house is a house is a right. Is that right, or am I like totally off? Tell me what it's really like in Airdrie.
Well, 30 years ago, this town was maybe by then 10,000 people. So there are a smattering of houses. Well, there are houses here that were built I think the oldest house that we've ever owned in Airdrie was built in about 1932.
Wow.
And see if this sounds familiar to your folks who live in big cities who like inner city lots because of 50 or 60 by 120 lots that can be subdivided. That's what it was, a large lot. They actually call it the village here in Airdrie. But by virtue of it being Airdrie, I think that whole neighborhood is about 6 by 6 blocks, right? So we don't have entire subdivisions of 1930s, 40s, 50s houses. So then there's a growth spurt. So there's houses in the 70s, and then you get a few in the 90s, and then 2000s. There's lots of properties at that point and subdivisions and growth. And so right from there on, starting about 06, 08, that's where you see boom, new subdivision. And some of those subdivisions that were built in that, if you haven't studied Alberta, the big boom happened here in about 05 to 06. Some of those houses are still underwater from then. It's crazy. Now, in most cases, people should have paid down debt by then. You'll still run into the occasional house where they bought it on a line of credit. You could, back in the day, get a house that was 100% HELOC. So all you were paying were interest. It was nice low payments. You never built any equity into said property. And we've run across those from time to time.
Yeah, they paid that high price in 05, 06. And
yeah. So the price ranges, just to finish that, can be anywhere from these days. If you find a house south of 350, it's rare. But if you find a house north of $1 million, there were no $1 million properties here.
No.
10 and 15 and 20 years ago, that's for sure. But again, the growth allows that to happen.
Yeah. So folks, you gotta know where you're buying. Try and be a neighborhood expert, and keep a close eye on what's going on in the places you say you want to buy, because we're in a fluctuating market. It's hard to tell what's going to show up. And if you know your market and when you see something in a spot that's your market, you will know what's going on. So Neil, I just want to talk about, I see this question is BC and Ontario the same or similar? So as Neil said, folks, the concept will be the same in all of the provinces.
Mm-hmm.
The technicalities of how it runs will be slightly different
again
in all of the provinces. The acceptance of the strategy will be different in all of the provinces. So Saskatchewan is actually the most accepting province for AFS, and Alberta might be next. But Ontario is not as accepting because they didn't have to have seller financing as badly as we did out in the West. It grew out here in the West because of the Great Depression and the droughts and the wind blowing and the topsoil going and the banks and cities owning half the properties because farmers were going bankrupt. That kind of horrible economic stress wasn't quite as bad in say Ontario. So there wasn't quite as much need for seller financing. So the AFS strategy is not as well known there. And so in Ontario, as much as the concept is the same, you really need to find two lawyers who understand and are prepared to help out with that strategy. It's very, very important in Ontario, or you'll put a lot of work into your AFS deal and it'll founder. But remember, it's seller financing. So there has to be some reason for a seller to want to be your bank.
Well, I think at the Friday before the course on Saturday, when we were sitting just chatting, again, some of the value of the live courses are what happened outside of at the front of the room on the day of the seminar. I think you had mentioned that, Barry, that there's a lawyer that you're aware of is he in the GTA of Ontario who is quite well versed with it and has done a number of these deals. So that's to tell Ontario folks. And I'm actually from Ottawa originally, so I'm one of those people who goes, Ontario is not just the GTA, right?
Yes.
And it's not even just Ottawa and Toronto. There's lots of markets
Lots of places
there that haven't had spectacular growth in prices that Toronto has had. If you're in, say, more northern Ontario, I know that it's a little different there for sure, right? So, so there's opportunities, I think, in a lot of markets.
There are, and part of it is, as we say, you have to understand the strategy so that you can recognize the opportunity. So,
for sure.
And on that note, Neil, thanks a lot as always for showing up. It's always a stimulating conversation.
We're at time. How did that happen?
It's fun. We're going to sign off now, and we'll be catching up again at our next event, whenever that might be. I think we might be taking Thanksgiving off, which is Monday the 10th, but we'll be certainly back here on the 17th. And on that, Donna?
Mhm.
Donna says I can say good night.
Take
Good
care,
night,
everyone.
everybody.
Bye.
Bye now.